Chapter 26-29. Elder Yun, are you sure you want to participate in the battle? Yu Tong asked. If you want to go now, I'll send a disciple to send you there. Won't Lord Sect Leader go? Yun Jinchong asked curiously. Yu Tong smiled and said, I still have other things to do, so I can't leave now. What about the other disciples who participated in the battle? They have been sent out of the sword tomb by this disciple. As for whether they will participate in the battle again, I don't know. Yun Jinchong thought for a while and said, then Lord Sect Leader should send me out of the sword tomb. In this kind of battle, the battle achievements are fleeting. I'd better worry about other things for Lord Sect Leader. Ha ha ha, that's exactly what I want. Yu Tong smiled and said, this battle is extremely dangerous. How can we be willing to take the risk? Yun Jinchong cupped his hands and bid farewell. Yu Tong ignored the continuous vibrations and noises and flew up to the sky to continue refining the great yin-yang six-direction sword spirit that was about to be completed. The Brahma Gold formation of the Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain was different from other formations. Just like what Xiaohua saw in the Seeing Cauldron, it was a formation set up by 6 pieces of metal essence fresh marrow. This Brahma Gold formation not only used the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the metal essence fresh marrow, but also used it as a guide to absorb the almost endless spiritual energy of heaven and earth and sword chi of the sword tomb for its own use. This kind of formation could not be set up under the sword tomb and mixed with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Instead, it was directly set up in the air of the sword tomb. As for the Wujia Zigui and the hidden passageway that Xiaohua had used to enter the Brahma Gold Great Array, they were all just camouflage techniques. Even with Xiaohua's ability, he still didn't realize that the Brahma Gold Great Array was actually set up in midair. Of course, if he wanted to, he would be trapped in the air at this time. Perhaps he would be able to notice something. Back then, Falling Gold Mountain's Yu Qingtian had also spent a lot of effort. He had even cooperated with some experts from the Huanhua sect to open up such a large area in the sword tomb to set up an array. Otherwise, it would not have attracted Zhang Yuhe's attention. At this moment, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth exploded within the sword catacomb. The 10-direction destruction formation of the Tao sect cultivators absorbed the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Although the Buddhist golden formation was hidden in mid-air, it was also affected by the 10-direction destruction formation. At the edge of the formation, the silver brilliance shook violently. Although the Buddhist golden formation was like an egg in a chick, it did not shake much, but it still affected one's cultivation. Yu Tong sat for a while and became impatient. He released the real tiger Dharma body and 6 rays of silver light flowed into 6 parts of the formation. Heh, you all can fight to the death. Yu Tong sneered. Wait until I successfully refine the prototype of the spirit-slaying vital ray and kill Feng Yi, then I'll quietly slip away from this sword catacomb. When I have the opportunity, my Fallen Gold Mountain may very well be the Fallen Gold faction. Perhaps during the next Tao Cultivator War, I can also sit in the meeting hall of Sky Patrol City. Moreover, that day when the sword cultivators pretended to be defeated and entered the sword catacomb, the disciples of different sword sects entered the sword catacomb according to the safe passage that their sword spirits had found. However, their direction was also in the direction of the Buddhist golden formation. However, the sword spirits could find most of the sword formations. The incomplete magic formations were not easy to find. Moreover, the safe passage was limited in width. If a few people flew in it, it would be fine. If there were more people, it would naturally trigger the magic formations and sword formations near the passage. The power of the incomplete magic formations and sword formations could be seen from Xiaohua's difficulty in entering the sword catacomb. How could these anxious sword cultivators resist? However, just a few miles into the sword catacomb, there was a series of sword cries. The sound of explosions and the screams of the sword cultivators resounded in the sky above the sword catacomb. LV Ruochang and the female swordsman of the Lunar Sun Sword Sect, Mu Ting, were together. Hearing the endless screams, LV Ruochang could not help but frown. She glanced at Mu Ting and asked in a low voice, "Junior Sister Mu, do you think this sword, should I inform the many warriors of the sword domain about the sword catacomb formation? With their mentality, I'm afraid that before we can lure the cultivators into the sword catacomb, they will die in the sword catacomb." At this time, LV Ruochang, who was far wiser than Qin Jian, also showed the gentleness of a female swordsman, and actually asked Mu Ting. If Tu Hong was here, he probably wouldn't even be able to hear the screams, right? Mu Ting was slightly stunned. She was naturally involved in the matter of the sword formation, but she didn't dare to reveal the slightest bit of information to the disciples of the sect. Even some of her trusted aides only knew of the existence of such a great formation. As for where it was located, they had no idea. Maybe we should say it. Mu Ting thought for a moment and nodded. Right now, the warriors of my sword domain are all in the dark and think that they have really lost. This is not good for the upcoming counterattack. Especially now that we have already arrived at the sword catacomb, the spells of those cultivators have been affected, so it is impossible for them to sense what we are talking about. Even if there are a few spies among the swordsmen, they might not be able to pass the message to the cultivators. Yes, Junior Sister's words agree with me. When LV Ruochang heard Mu Ting's words, she nodded her head slightly. This morale is especially important on the battlefield. Previously, when we were facing the cultivators, we couldn't let them discover us. After which, LV Ruochang turned her head and asked, "How far away are the cultivators of the Dao sect from us now? Are they chasing after us?" Hearing LV Ruochang's question, a hale and hearty old man hurriedly took out a sword slip from his bosom. After looking at it for a moment, he said, "According to the report of the disciples who were scouting behind us, the cultivators of the Dao sect rested a little in front of the sword catacomb before rushing into the sword catacomb. Moreover, just like us sword cultivators, they split into several paths to enter. If we sword cultivators can have sword spirits to find the way, then the cultivators of the Dao sect will naturally have secret techniques as well. This is not surprising." LV Ruochang waved her hand and said, "Then are there any cultivators behind us?" "Yes. It seems to be a disciple of the Huanhua sect." The old man hurriedly replied. "Good, such a pursuit is reasonable." LV Ruochang nodded and was about to speak. Wang, a wave of sword cries came from behind LV Ruochang and the others. Hundreds of crimson sword lights enveloped the sky, and heart-wrenching screams could be faintly heard. "Ha ha ha!" LV Ruochang pointed her finger and said, "Look, my sword spirit can find the sword formation, the cultivators of the Huanhua sect can find the formation, but the sword formation is unable to defend against it." Indeed. Seeing this, the corner of Mu Ting's mouth revealed a smile. Although we are only a few kilometers away from the cultivators, normally, we would be able to attack them in the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. However, right now, we can't even find this place in the time it takes to eat a meal. Alright, time in. This is my sword token. Lu Ruochang reached out his hand, took out a sword slip and handed it over to the old man. Send it to the various sword sects. Also, inform all the swordsmen of my Black Phoenix sword sect that our defeat today was just a ruse. In front of the sword tomb, there is a four-direction sword formation that the warriors of my sword region have set up for many years. They only need to listen to my orders and lure the cultivators of the Dao sect into the sword formation. Those hundreds of thousands of cultivators will not be able to escape even if they have wings. Yes, disciple understands. Tai Min's face revealed a look of pleasant surprise. She reached out to take LV Ruochang's sword slip and instructed her disciples to pass down the order. Mu Ting also immediately instructed her disciples to pass down the order. After Tai Min finished assigning the disciples, LV Ruochang took out a few sword slips and handed them to him, instructing, "This is the secret technique of the sword formation that my Black Phoenix sword sect is stationed in. Distribute it to the disciples as well. This secret technique is very simple. It has already been taught to the disciples in advance before the battle. When they enter the sword formation later, they only need to follow the command of the main formation." "Yes." Tai Min responded again. She extended her divine thought and smiled. "Martial Uncle LV's plan is flawless. I have also learned this secret technique before, but I did not expect to use it here. Ha ha ha. Go." LV Ruochang waved his hand and said, "Tell the warriors of my Black Phoenix sword sect that they are not retreating in defeat. They are advancing towards victory." "Yes." Tai Min left happily. At this time, Mu Ting had also finished assigning the disciples and flew forward with LV Ruochang. Suddenly, Mu Ting was alert. LV Ruochang's heart was in turmoil. In order to set up the four-direction sword array, she had comprehended most of the sword arrays in the sword domain. Even if it was the Dao sect's array, she did not skimp on it. Seeing such a huge commotion around her, how could she not know that she had fallen into the Dao sect's array? While LV Ruochang's mouth was bitter, a series of questions arose in her mind. The Dao sect's cultivators. How could they think of setting up an array in the sword catacomb? Those Jindan stage cultivators who work behind closed doors in the meeting hall. How could they have such wisdom? Could it be that Tu Hong is not dead, and is faking his death in Sky Patrol City? Otherwise, how could they know that the warriors of the sword domain would definitely retreat? And that they would definitely retreat to the sword catacomb? Moreover, the sword catacomb is so big, this array is just a drop in the ocean. How could they know that the warriors of the sword domain would definitely retreat to here? Could it be that there are Dao sect spies in the sword domain? This spy is also an illusory sword cultivator? Or the sword essence just now was done by a Dao sect cultivator? This is impossible. The warriors of the sword domain had already set up a sword array in the sword catacomb, and this place is not too far away from my sword array. Could it be that the warriors of the sword domain did not notice it? She thought about how she had painstakingly set up the sword array, but at the last moment, when she was trying to lure the enemy, it turned out to be real and fell into the cultivator's array. LV Ruochang felt a sweet taste in her throat, and she almost vomited blood. It was even more difficult for the hundreds of thousands of swordsmen to adapt to such a situation. Previously, they were like birds that were startled by the twang of a bow and wanted to escape from the sword tomb. However, when they received the sword order, they knew that they were just bait to lure the cultivators into a place of eternal damnation. The joy and excitement had just risen, but it was only for a moment before they were immediately trapped in such a huge magic array. It was only now that they realized that they were the ones who had entered a place of eternal damnation. The brief happiness just now was just an extremely brief dream. "Senior Sister LV, what's going on?" Mu Ting groaned and hurriedly asked, "Is this a remnant array, or could it be the sword array of the sword domain?" LV Ruochang gritted her teeth, and the shock and fear in her eyes disappeared. She said coldly, "Junior sister, release your divine sense and have a look." "Oh no, my divine sense can't leave my body." Mu Ting was shocked, and then she very naturally mobilized the sword essence. Only when the sword essence in her body flowed naturally did she relax, but she forgot that just now, she had already released her sword essence outside her body. How can an incomplete formation cover such a large area? Can an incomplete sword array have such great power? LV Ruochang said faintly, "This is the array set up by the Dao sect cultivators in the sword catacomb." We have now fallen into the ambush of the Tao sect cultivators. This is impossible. Mu Ting said in a flustered and exasperated manner. How could those golden core cultivators, who are like Jurassic beasts, know the route we took to retreat? How could they set up an array in the sword catacomb without anyone knowing? Mu Ting still wanted to say it. She seemed to really not want to believe that she had fallen into the trap of the cultivators, but LV Ruochang coldly interrupted her. Junior sister Mu, now that things have come to this, we need to calm down. You have to know that you are a third-grade illusory swordsman, and can easily kill ordinary golden core cultivators. How can you be so flustered? Besides, the battlefield changes rapidly, and it is always difficult to distinguish between the enemy and us. If we fall into the trap of the cultivators, we can just kill our way out. What is there to be afraid of? Hearing this, Mu Ting was slightly quiet, but she smiled bitterly and said, I am not flustered, but I feel that it is extremely inconceivable. This is simply too inconceivable. Yes, I also feel that it is not possible. But it has indeed happened. LV Ruochang snorted coldly and said, however, the cultivators want to set up an array in the sword catacomb to strangle us, which is too whimsical. Although there are only a few 100,000 of us left, the sword catacomb is filled with gold chi, sword intent, and sword chi. These are all things that the cultivators cannot control. Look at the array, it is dozens of miles long, and there must be a sword array hidden inside. We only need to find the flaws and break it one by one. After LV Ruochang finished speaking, he did not wait for Mu Ting to answer. He looked around and ordered, you all immediately go to each sword sect to contact the scouting disciples and find out the general situation of the array. Remember, once you have found out, no matter the cost. Yes, disciples understand. More than a dozen fourth-grade swordsmen received the order and flew in all directions. LV Ruochang flew up again, and his sword intent soared into the sky. The huge phoenix sword light hovered above his head. In addition to the flying swords of the surrounding swordsmen, more than a dozen sword intents with the same sword momentum soared into the sky and flew in this direction. In just the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the swordsmen of the illusory sword realm flew to LV Ruochang's side. These swordsmen, without exception, had a thick puzzled expression on their faces. They were originally hunters, but suddenly became prey. Chapter 2631. Humph. Xuechong snorted. Frightened by Tsang Yuan's angry eyes, he didn't speak again. Chu Jianchong opened his mouth but didn't say anything. My fellow cultivators, if you want to die here, I won't stop you. You can debate again and even fight. Let's see who is right. LV Ruochang said coldly, however, if you want to break this magic array, pass through the sword tomb safely, and lead the cultivators into our sword array again, then, you have to listen to my orders. For a moment, more than a dozen people were silent. I feel very guilty. I didn't expect that everything I had arranged before would change because of some accidents and because of my cautiousness. LV Ruochang said again, however, you have to know that we have not reached the end, and we are far from being forced to the edge. Moreover, I have to tell all of you that even if all of us perish here, we'll absolutely not lose this battle, and will definitely make great contributions to the sword domain. All the brave warriors in sword domain will definitely respect us for our meritorious deeds. Of course, we are in a dangerous situation right now, but we still have to fight our way out of this formation because the ones who will have the last laugh are us swordsmen, not those stupid cultivators who are as stupid as Jurassic beasts. LV Ruochang encouraged them again. The sword array that we have arranged for many years is not far away. Don't you want to see them fall into the sword array? LV Jianyu, you don't have to say these words. Jianli of the Lujian sect, who was also a swordsman at the second level of the illusory sword realm, said with a wry smile, how can we not understand these principles? Just tell us how to break the magic array. We will definitely follow your lead. Good. LV Ruochang clapped his hands and said, I have arranged for my disciples to explore this magic array. When we have the information, we can make a decision. Okay. More than a dozen illusory swordsmen nodded. Although there were still doubts in their eyes, they still quieted down. That was exactly what Jianli said. Who among the illusory swordsmen did not understand? But the problem was that this matter was too strange, and no one could accept it in a short time. Therefore, even the second and third grade illusory swordsmen, who were already immortals in the eyes of ordinary people, were still as wishy-washy as a resentful wife. Time passed bit by bit. The disciples who were patrolling the area did not return. Not even a sword slip was sent back. If not for the fact that their divine sense could not leave their bodies, these sword cultivators would have already released their divine sense. Unlike the other illusory sword cultivators, Lu Ruochang raised his head and stared at the sky that was overflowing with several kinds of brilliance, above the ball of light that had gathered together. That spot of light was like a 10-colored eye. It was also staring at the hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators in the field. The flowing brilliance was like a mocking gaze. Lu Ruochang raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to speak, a shrill sword cry rang out. A flying sword message was sent over from afar. Flying sword message. Everyone was dumbfounded. After all, although they couldn't see the end of this formation, when the formation had just closed, the swordsmen were only a few dozen miles away. According to their estimation, this formation was only a few dozen miles in size, not more than 100 miles in size. Within this distance, ordinary sword techniques for transmitting messages would be effective. There was no need to use a flying sword to transmit messages. As if thinking of something, Lu Ruochang's face turned cold. He waved his hand, and the flying sword turned into a stream of light and fell into his hand. Lu Ruochang shook her head slightly and said, however, according to Tai Min's investigation, this array should be similar to the Heaven and Earth Flag Gate array that I know of. Is LV Jianyu very familiar with this array? Ruoling seemed to be relieved as she asked in a low voice. Sigh. Lu Ruochang sighed slightly. The Heaven and Earth Flag Gate array has 4 flag gates, which is the meaning of heaven and earth. I have studied the way to break it. And this array actually has as many as 10 flag gates. I'm afraid it's not the same as the Heaven and Earth Flag Gate array. LV Jianyu, don't be discouraged, and don't regret it. Ruoling smiled and said, we have all seen your contributions. Now that we have fallen into a cultivator's array, it is purely by chance. Although this array is different from the Heaven and Earth Flag Gate array, it is still derived from it. Sword Friend is wise and has studied arrays for many years, so you are very proficient in breaking arrays. Breaking this array will still depend on Sword Friend's strength. Thank you for your encouragement, Senior Sister Ruoling. Lu Ruochang's lips curled into a smile. It was an extremely rare sweet smile, but there was also bitterness in this smile. I also want to lead all of you to break this array successfully. I am not afraid even if my body is smashed to pieces, but what? Ruoling's face was filled with realization. The worst case scenario is that we die here. What else can we do? Senior Sister Ruoling has an excellent state of mind. If any of us step into the sword transformation realm, you will be the first. Lu Ruochang praised. Even if I want to transform into a sword, I have to get through this difficulty. Ruoling laughed. When I transform into a sword in the future, I will definitely remember Junior Sister Lu. I will definitely do my best. Lu Ruochang took a deep breath and said, but I am not even half confident. Is this array that powerful? A trace of confusion flashed across Ruoling's eyes. After all, she had been involved in the Dao Cultivator War since the beginning. She had seen Lu Ruochang's every scheme and plan. There had never been a time when Lu Ruochang had backed down like this. Fellow Daoist Lu, you think too highly of the Dao sect. Jianli also did not see the sword slip. At this moment, he calmed down and seemed to have thought of something. He said, as the saying goes, surround 10 times the enemy. Right now, we only have a few 100,000 swordsmen and the Dao sect cultivators only have a few 100,000 people. If they are confident in surrounding us, they can naturally attack from the front and back. They can just fight to the death. Why do they have to be so sneaky? Why do they have to set up this stupid array? From what I see, this array must have been hastily set up by them as a diversion. We only need to point our swords and we will definitely be able to break it. When Jianli said this, many swordsmen's eyes lit up. They felt that his words made sense. However, Mu Ting and Chu Jianchong, who had seen the sword slip, did not think so. At least, Chu Jianchong looked coldly at Jianli and did not say a word. Ruoling was also bewildered. She took the sword slip from Chu Jianchong and used her divine sense to scan it. When Tai Min sent out the flying sword slip, he chose a flag gate to enter. According to what he said before he died, the flag gate was filled with sword light. The golden light was so dazzling that it could penetrate the bone marrow. The sword essence in his body was attracted by the golden light and rushed out uncontrollably. His flying sword had long been penetrated by the flying sword. He could not send out a normal sword slip and could only use the flying sword slip to send out what he knew. Jianli could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Chapter 2632. That's right. LV Ruochang nodded. I've gained something just now. I want to take advantage of the fact that this formation has just been set up and join forces to find its flaw. Perhaps we can break it in one blow. Ruoling frowned slightly and said unhappily, since LV Jianyu has a plan, feel free to tell us. We're in a dangerous situation now. The more time we can take action, the more chance we have to survive. I wanted to tell you earlier, but firstly, I wasn't confident. Secondly, the flaw of this sword formation must be where the defense is the most rigorous. There must be a price to pay if we want to attack it. I can't let you all understand. LV Ruochang said awkwardly. Obviously, the ambush of this sword tombs formation was a big blow to LV Ruochang. She no longer had the composure of commanding the world and began to hesitate many times. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It meant growth, but it wasn't necessarily a good thing either. Tell us about it. Ruoling said and looked up thoughtfully. Is it the light spot in the center of the formation? That's right. LV Ruochang's brows relaxed and she nodded. There are 10 colors and 10 flag gates. The center of this sky curtain is the center of the formation. We only need to destroy this center, and the 10 flag gates will collapse at the same time. The formation will naturally break on its own. It's that simple. Mu Ting didn't believe it. It's that simple. But the defensive or offensive means of this light spot must be extremely powerful. LV Ruochang explained. However, this is exactly what's beneficial to us. Ruoling said with a smile. More than 10 of us illusory swordsmen are comparable to swords. We can definitely destroy this center with a joint attack. What LV Jianyu said is the most beneficial plan for us. But this attack will definitely cause casualties, or even death. I can't not. LV Ruochang said hesitantly. LV Ruochang. Ruoling sneered. Sword Realm's Transformation Sword Senior appointed you as the battle plan before the battle. Since the battle began, our Sword Realm's warriors have won one victory after another while the Dao sect's cultivators have been defeated. Your performance is obvious to all. If we win this battle, your contribution will be the greatest. If we lose, your contribution will also be the greatest. What are you afraid of when you have such meritorious service? If you are so hesitant, what qualifications do you have to command this battle? How can you be worthy of Senior Huajian's trust? Are you still that Lu Ruochang? Ruo Ling's words were like knives, and each sentence was like a sword, directly piercing into Lu Ruochang's heart. Lu Ruochang's face flushed red. Ha ha ha, exactly. Zhang Yuan, who was looking at the sword scroll, opened his mouth wide. His hand, which was as large as a palm leaf fan, clenched slightly, and the sword scroll turned into powder in his hand. He laughed loudly and said, "If sword friend Lu has seen this sword scroll, then it means that we have seen it. What else is there for us to see? Wherever LV Jinyo's sword points, that's where our flying swords will point. Why should we hesitate?" That's right. Mu Ting and the rest also came to a realization at this moment. They nodded and cried out. Good. Lu Ruochang's eyes narrowed. In an instant, her heart was filled with lofty aspirations. Her face returned to its previous coldness. Following her praise, sword light flashed around her body. Sword chi overflowed, and the fierce phoenix sword essence soared into the sky. It circled above her head for a moment, and then rushed into her forehead. Kong! A loud sword cry was emitted from Lu Ruochang's body. Following the sword cry, a huge sword slowly appeared amidst the flashing sword light. However, when she flew closer, she saw that there were already several swordsmen who had drawn their swords and were waiting in the mist. Otherwise, you would have been a ghost under my sword long ago. Humph, what's the use of just a sharp tongue? Can you break my golden destruction array? GMO was not angry. He snorted at the same time, "You swordsmen should enter the array. Let's see what happens inside the array." Before his voice died away, a golden brilliance surged above the flag gate. As the brilliance rotated, a golden gate that was several feet in size appeared from the flag gate. The golden brilliance inside the golden gate was extremely dazzling, but no clues could be seen. His LV Ruochang sucked in a breath of cold air. This was the first time she had seen such a strange way of entering the array. The golden light circled around the edges of the golden door, and it was no different from the sharp sword chi. Her first suspicion was that this golden door was a weapon used to kill people. What? Lu Ruochang, you don't dare to enter. Ji Mo's voice came from inside the golden gate. Don't you sword cultivators claim that you walk with your sword and move forward bravely? Ha ha ha, not bad, not bad. Sure enough, the person who knows me best can only be my opponent, and not my friend. Lu Ruochang waved her hand, raised her head and roared. The phoenix sword essence flapped its sword wings and rushed into the golden gate. Then Lu Ruochang's body flashed with sword radiance as she flew in. There was indeed no danger inside the golden gate. However, just as Lu Ruochang passed through the golden gate, the dazzling golden brilliance immediately dimmed, and a huge world appeared before her eyes. She saw a huge sword mountain in the distance. Countless flying swords were piled up, and it was hundreds of feet tall. The sword mountain was dozens of miles away, and countless broken flying swords were stabbed into the ground. At the same time, there were countless flying swords flying freely in the air like birds. A sorrowful, a proud, lonely, and cold sword essence filled the entire world. Sword world. In a flash, Lu Ruochang was slightly absent-minded. The space inside the array was really similar to the supreme realm of sword cultivators. This realm of using swords to create all things in the world was also the goal that Lu Ruochang had been pursuing all her life. It's a pity. You only know the shape of flying swords, but not the spirit of flying swords. You can't understand the will of flying swords, and you don't even know the heart of flying swords. How can you use flying swords to create the world? Lu Ruochang then sighed. The mountains and cliffs in this array can only be piled up by flying swords, and cannot be created using sword essence. It's really a huge mistake. Ha ha ha! Golden brilliance shining out of the sword tomb, illuminating the body, and calamity descends. Even if you have the flying technique of sword cultivators, it's hard to escape from this array and lose your life. Lu Ruochang. This is the sword tomb, my golden destruction array, and the burial place of your Black Phoenix sword sect's 10,000 swordsmen. Where is your so-called sword that condenses the world? With a loud laugh, the figures of 4 cultivators appeared on the sword mountain, in the air, and near the flying swords. The early gold core stage Ji Yi laughed coldly. Lu Ruochang, we meet again. In the air, Ji Hong's face was the ugliest. This is your burial place. Today, we must avenge Imperial Thunder Sect's Qian Mo. Oh. Is that so? Lu Ruochang did not seem surprised, and instead asked, I wonder which one of you is prepared to self-destruct today. Why would we want to self-destruct? Thousand Leaf Ridge's Zhou Qingping laughed. We heard that Qin Jian's self-destruction did not even injure my Dao Sect's Foundation establishment disciples. It's very strange how a sword cultivator self-destructs, and how he can injure himself but not others. If you have the heart, why don't you satisfy our curiosity? Zhou Qingping's words were really obscure. Hearing it, Lu Ruochang was slightly taken aback, but soon after, he sneered and looked left and right. At this time, the 10,000 Black Phoenix Sword sect disciples had all entered, and they really did not encounter any obstruction at the golden door. After Lu Ruochang was relieved, he looked at the 4 cultivators who appeared in different places with interest. This sword has 2 questions that I have always wanted to ask. I wonder which one of you can answer them. Say it. Since you don't have much time left, we will be happy to answer your last question in this Dawn Rain continent. Zhou Qingping answered without hesitation. Lu Ruochang snorted and said with extreme contempt, if the sect master of Thousand Leaf Ridge came, this sword would still be a little afraid. You are just an early golden core cultivator. This sword does not put you in my eyes at all. What ability do you have to make this sword fall here? When you fall, you will naturally know that this old man has the ability. Zhou Qingping's mouth was not at a disadvantage. GMO, this sword asks you, when did your Sky Patrol City and Conference Hall set up this sword formation in the sword tomb? How did you hide it from the warriors of my sword region? Which cultivator set up this great formation? Lu Ruochang turned to ask GMO, this old one will tell you now. Clear Leaf Sect's Ji Hong said loudly, when my Dao sect attacked the spirit stone mine that your sword cultivator occupied, we had already set up this sword formation. And the setting up of this sword formation was the plan of Qian Mo from the Imperial Thunder sect. Chapter 2634. Qian Mo, how could he? LV Ruochang was stunned. How could he have such a plan? Could it be that it wasn't Tu Hong's doing? Senior brother Tu was assassinated by Qin Jian. How could he come back to life? If senior brother Tu was here, would he need to force all of you into the sword tomb? He would have killed all of you during the battle at the Spirit Stone Mine. GMO sneered. Luckily, this wasn't Tu Hong's plan to fake his death. LV Ruochang was still fearful of Tu Hong. Hearing that Tu Hong had indeed passed away, she heaved a sigh of relief. Of course, she would never say that Qin Jian had already told her that Tu Hong wasn't assassinated by him. Why? Now you know the cycle of karma, revenge breeds revenge. Ji Hong sneered, Daoist friend Xian Mo died because of you. Today, you will fall into his trap and die because of him. Kiki, I don't know how many cultivators have died in my hands. LV Ruochang wasn't angry. Instead, she replied, if revenge breeds revenge, I would have died 1,000 times over. Then I shall let you know the power of this array. Ji Hong waved her hand and a faint golden banner appeared in her hand. She shouted, disciples, listen to my command, wait. LV Ruochang waved her hand and said, I have a question. Speak. Ji Hong shouted. If this array is called the Golden Destruction Array, what is the name of the entire array? You are really thirsty for knowledge. Ji Hong mocked, not to mention that I won't tell you. Even if I tell you, can you break this array? My men. Listen to my command. Ji Hong hated LV Ruochang to the core. She had no intention of answering her question. She waved the small banner in her hand and countless faint golden light pierced the sky. Kill. Following Ji Hong's command, a strange fluctuation appeared near Ji Hong. Countless sword light and sword chi were produced. Within the sword chi, there was a sparkling golden light. It was as though there was a sword wave in the sea of swords under the sun. It surged towards the tens of thousands of sword cultivators. GMO frowned slightly when he saw Ji Hong take action. Although the four of them were jointly in charge of the Golden Destruction Formation, Heng Feng had placed him in front of the four of them. Even Xiong Huasong's arrangements were left to him. He should be the one to launch the first attack against the sword cultivator. However, following the activation of the Clear Leaf Sect, the Cool Breeze Valley and the Thousand Leaf Ridge followed suit. The three figures gradually disappeared in the golden light. GMO had no choice but to wave his array flag and instruct the Sky Patrol City disciples to activate the Dharma array. He then disappeared with a displeased look on his face. Disciples, get into formation. Seeing that Ji Hong had activated the Golden Destruction Array without a word, LV Ruochang naturally waved her hand. The 10,000 disciples behind her had already gathered as if they were in the clear cave. Thousands of sword lights flashed, and the sword chi crisscrossed. They were about to face the attack of the array. However, what happened next far exceeded LV Ruochang's expectations. It was something that the disciples of the Black Phoenix Sword sect had never seen even in their dreams. The four golden core cultivators waved their array flags, and four golden lights condensed at the array flags. As the golden lights flickered, the four figures disappeared one after another. The four golden lights were like four golden swords hanging in mid-air, motionless. Seeing that all the swordsmen had released their flying swords, the four golden swords suddenly exploded, turning into thousands of light spots that rushed into the sky. Rumble. A sound that was completely different from the sound of the swords rang out. The scene in the entire space began to distort, as if the entire world had suddenly turned upside down. The dozens of huge swords gradually melted in this golden light and finally disappeared. Even LV Ruochang's phoenix sword intent was shattered by this golden light, and it became like a bald chicken. Oh no! LV Ruochang was shocked. The Golden Destruction Formation. So the power is actually this inexplicable golden light. LV Ruochang had already understood that the thousands of broken swords were just a cover. This golden light was the trump card condensed by the magical power of the disciples of the four sects behind the formation. Not only that, the golden light passed through the sword intent and fell on LV Ruochang's body. Streaks of pain, as if her flesh was being torn apart, appeared on the surface of her body. The flashing sword light around her could not block the corrosion of this golden light. LV Ruochang was shocked. She knew in her heart that when a sword cultivator faced a cultivator, it depended on the strength of the physical body. Only a strong physical body could merge with the flying sword and even turn it into a sword. This golden light could penetrate the protective sword light of a third-grade illusory swordsman and cause her pain. How could the drawing sword and the sword-nurturing swordsman resist it? Just as this thought appeared in LV Ruochang's mind, hundreds of screams were heard. At the place where the golden light fell, hundreds of sword-nurturing swords disciples were drenched in blood and fell from the sky together. In the blood, the eerie white bones could be seen. It was the same as the white bones on the ground outside the flag gate. What kind of formation is this? How can it be so powerful? LV Ruochang was a little flustered. The sword vitality in her body circulated rapidly, and the broken phoenix sword intent flew to her forehead. As the sword light flourished, she had already activated the secret technique. Within her body, sword light overflowed, and a huge flying sword transformed from her body. LV Ruochang was forced to use her sword transformation secret technique as soon as she entered the golden destruction formation. Wu, the powerful sword chi on the huge sword imprisoned the torrential sword flow. As the sword light flashed, the entire sword flow seemed to have a tendency to reverse. A third-grade illusory swordsman can resist 4 early-stage golden core cultivators. An angry voice sounded again. It was Ji Hong of the Clear Leaf sect. But, can you resist the magical power of 100,000 Foundation Establishment disciples? As she spoke, several rays of golden light bloomed in mid-air, and countless broken swords were born from the sword flow. The huge sword chi rushed out and broke through the imprisonment of LV Ruochang's huge sword. It poured down again, and within the sword flow, even more golden light was born. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. There was still the sound of drizzling rain. The sword light of the huge sword was washed by the golden light and slowly corroded. Screams were heard as the golden light brushed down. One by one, the sword-nurturing swordsmen were killed by the golden light without any chance to fight back. The sword-nurturing swordsmen were slightly better off, but in the golden light, their sword light was also corroded and washed away. It was like a faded old cloth that was about to become transparent. In the golden light, the pale faces of all the sword-nurturing swordsmen were brushed with golden powder. They were like ferocious puppets, their lives hanging by a thread. Beside LV Ruochang, there were more than 10 sword-nurturing swordsmen of the 1st and 2nd grade. That day in the clear cave, because they wanted to feign defeat, they did not reveal their cultivation. Now, they did not dare to hide it anymore. Regardless of whether it was the Taiching sect's disciples or De Sun and Huang Feng, they did not have to face the illusory swords directly. How could he not want to kill these swordsmen who made him gnash his teeth in hatred? Hearing Huang Feng's words, De Sun nodded slightly. Since they are stubborn people, we can only stop killing with killing. Fellow Daoist Huang, let's activate the formation together and take revenge for fellow Daoist Li Qingshu of the Immortal Music sect. Good, fellow Daoist De Sun's words are exactly what I want. Huang Feng cracked a smile and the flag in his hand swayed along with De Sun. A faint breeze blew past and the 2 white clouds were actually blown away. It was as if there was not a trace of smoke or fire. It was completely the same as the flowing clouds in the sky. Not good. This formation. Zhu Qingye's sword intent was a red sun. In his early years, when he was nurturing his sword intent, he had a lot of experience of the changes in heaven and earth. When he saw that the changes in this formation were extremely similar to the changes in the sky, he immediately felt that something was wrong. He knew that the power of this formation must be extremely powerful. Disciples. Zhu Qingye ordered without hesitation. Form the formation and attack. Yes. More than 10,000 disciples responded. One by one, they released their flying swords. The sword chi was swift and fierce, surging within the formation. However, this formation was formed. How should they attack? The entire heaven and earth was like the image of the sky. There was not the slightest trace of a cultivator. They couldn't attack from all directions. It was also at this moment that another breeze blew past. It was as if it was a light strand, blowing past the hair of a swordsman. When it blew past the second swordsman, that breeze had already split into 2 strands. However, in the blink of an eye, a hurricane was born among the swordsmen. The hurricane blew the sword armor of the 10,000 swordsmen. That flickering flame-like sword light also swayed in this hurricane. In the end, this hurricane rushed to the back of the swordsman, which was also where the flag gate was located. Following the sound, the scene at the flag gate began to distort. It was as if the sky was being rolled up by the hurricane. Immediately after, the surrounding sky was also sucked in. That azure sky was extremely distorted and looked very strange. Zhu Qingye was somewhat at a loss. Although he was a third-grade illusory swordsman and could kill late-stage gold core realm cultivators with a flying sword, he really didn't understand formations. Facing the fluctuations in the sky and the countless hurricanes, he really didn't know how to deal with it. Come out, Zhu Qingye clenched his teeth, and the red sun sunk into his forehead. The crimson sword light mixed with flames was emitted from his body, and a crimson greatsword slowly emerged from his body. Zhu Qingye had transformed into a sword. He was prepared to deal with the changes by remaining still and not changing. The huge crimson sword flickered in mid-air, illuminating the distorted sky for nearly 1,000 feet. Sure enough, the place where the sword chi was pointed at showed signs of stagnation. Seeing this, the other 10 or so swordsmen at the first and second grade of the illusory swordsmen immediately activated their secret techniques. Those who could transform into swords didn't care about the price and released their huge swords. Several huge flying swords stood under the changing sky, looking like a cornerstone. Moreover, where the sword chi was pointed at, it seemed as if it was going to tear the distorted sky apart. Although I've transformed into a sword, facing 100,000 Dao sect disciples is still beyond my power. Disciples, their 100,000 Dao sect cultivators don't dare to face my 10,000 sword cultivators, so they can only rely on this strange formation. As long as we break the transcendence energy condensed by this formation will naturally be broken. Disciples of the bright sword sect, follow me to kill the cultivators. Seeing the second round ball falling like a meteor, the whistling of the wind had already rushed into their ears. Zhu Qingye roared, and his huge sword flew up first. Kill, Ji Ming and the others naturally didn't dare to be negligent. They urged their flying swords and followed Zhu Qingye to meet the attack. Rumble, another sound that wasn't inferior to the first round ball came from midair, and it resounded through the entire starry sky. Although the flying swords of many disciples who had drawn their swords and nurtured their swords instantly dimmed, the second round ball was still blocked. Even Zhu Qingye's huge sword didn't have any special changes. These sword cultivators are really impressive. Behind the starry sky, De Sun and Huang Feng stood in midair with flags in their hands. De Sun looked at the commotion in the starry sky and sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, the Taiching sect's disciples, Exotic Beast sect's disciples, and Immortal Music sect's disciples were divided into 3 groups. Each group was divided into different groups, and the disciples of each group were sitting cross-legged in different positions. Everyone's hands were forming different hand seals. Perhaps the hand seals of the disciples in each position were similar, but the hand seals of the disciples in each group were not the same. Yes, I wanted to deliberately anger Zhu Qingye just now, but he didn't have the slightest bit of disorder. Even when the Sky Destroyer formation showed its ferocity, there was only a trace of astonishment on his face. Oh. Fellow Huang can actually see Zhu Qingye's expression when he transformed into a sword. Sun didn't know if it was intentional or not, but his face showed surprise. Of course I can't see it. Huang Feng's expression changed slightly, and he said lightly, but the sword hairs on the huge sword are stable and not scattered at all. It must be the reason why Zhu Qingye's state of mind is so calm. Good. Sun clapped his hands and said, Fellow Huang is right. When I got this sword diagram, I was already very surprised. I didn't expect that this sword cultivator who had never seen the Great Star Formation before would be as steady as a rock. I really admire him. Unfortunately, the Sky Destroyer Formation, the disciples of the three factions are not very familiar with it. They can only use their magic power to move the ball like a star. Huang Feng sighed again and said, if these disciples are given 10 more days, these balls will be able to move freely. Even if they face hundreds of illusory swords, it will be a piece of cake. There are hundreds of thousands of disciples of the three factions. Sun smiled and said, what's the big deal about killing hundreds of illusory swords? Even if they transform into swords, they can still be killed. Really? Fellow Xiong, is that so? Huang Feng's face showed surprise. Sun coughed twice and said in a low voice, this is just my guess. How can Xiong Huasong boast like this? However, according to what he said, this 10-direction destroyer formation is derived from the ancient ominous formation, and it is already incomplete. In the complete Sky Destroyer Formation, the balls condensed by the magic power of these hundreds of thousands of disciples should follow the path of the real Heavenly Way Star Formation. Zhu Qingye will not be able to withstand it at all. If there is really an ancient ominous formation here, not to mention illusory swords, even if they transform into swords, they will still be killed. That's impossible, right? Huang Feng asked in disbelief, the path of the Heavenly Way only exists in legends. Even if there is a formation simulation, it can't be real, right? Besides, how can these hundreds of thousands of disciples comprehend the path of the Heavenly Way? Even you and I have never seen the real path of the Heavenly Way, right? You don't understand this. Sun's gaze swept across the densely packed and orderly disciples of the three factions, and then looked up at the starry sky. There were dozens of balls being activated from all directions. He felt at ease and said, what is the Heavenly Way? The real Heavenly Way is indiscernible, and the path of the stars under the Heavenly Way is unfathomable. However, among the masses, there is a kind of embodiment of the Heavenly Way. For example, if a disciple of the Strange Beast sect activates this ball, it will follow a straight path. But what if a disciple of the Immortal Music sect is added? The path may change. What if a disciple of the Tai Ching sect is added? The path will be even more unpredictable. This Huang understands. Huang Feng immediately understood. The Heavenly Way is indiscernible, and the 100,000 disciples activating their magic power to control the ball doesn't have any path to speak of. Isn't this the true essence of the Heavenly Way being indiscernible? Therefore, that ball is like a real star, incomparably powerful. Sun's heart trembled. He had a new view of this Strange Beast sect's cultivator who was flattering him. To tell the truth, when Xiong Huasong had mentioned this, he had thought about it for a long time. He had even combined it with some of the general principles of the Tai Ching sect's cultivation techniques. He hadn't expected that this Strange Beast sect's early gold core cultivator would be able to see through the mystery in an instant. Huang Feng looked at the starry sky and muttered, actually, according to this Huang's thoughts, the real heavenly exterminating formation is probably only a single ball. Just a single ball would be enough to completely annihilate these hundreds of thousands of swordsmen, right? There's simply no need for so many balls. That's right. Fellow Daoist Xiong, that's exactly what you said. That's a complete ancient ominous formation. De Sun was even more astonished. He asked curiously, could it be that fellow Daoist Huang has seen such a strange formation before? Huang Feng was shocked. He hurriedly smiled apologetically and said, this Huang is merely a gold core disciple of the strange beast sect. How could I have seen such a formation before? Even my strange beast sect leader has probably never heard of such a strange formation, right? This Huang is merely speaking according to fellow Daoist De Sun's words. I'm just casually speaking. As he spoke, Huang Feng pointed his hand and said, fellow Daoist, quickly look. These sword cultivators really can't hold on any longer. Although De Sun was somewhat puzzled, he was still concerned about the formation. When he heard Huang Feng's words, he could only look at the formation. Indeed, at this moment, the dozens of balls within the formation had already been activated by the hundreds of thousands of disciples of the three sections. They whistled as they charged towards the hundreds of thousands of sword cultivator disciples. These dozens of balls enveloped these disciples from all directions. That oppressive feeling of having nowhere to run firmly controlled the sword cultivator disciples. Rumble. Amidst the loud rumbling sounds, the sword cultivator disciples who had survived the previous rounds began to scream miserably. Chapter 26:37. Buzz. 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 In the distant horizon, at the end of the starry sky, dozens of balls buzzed again. Pushed by 100,000 cultivators, they rained down on the disciples of the bright sword sect like meteors. Not only were Ji Ming and the other Grade 1 and Grade 2 illusory swordsmen shocked, even Zhu Qingye, who had transformed into a sword, groaned inwardly. He knew very well that he could only withstand one more attack. After that, he wouldn't be able to maintain his human form. My life is over. Zhu Qingye couldn't help but feel disheartened. He felt that he really couldn't face the dozens of balls that seemed capable of destroying heaven and earth. Not far from the sky exterminating formation was the wind exterminating formation. At this moment, the flag gate of the wind exterminating formation was emitting a gloomy brilliance. After Bright Yang Sword Sect's Xue Chong led over 10,000 disciples into the formation, the flag gate should have been closed tightly. The brilliance was even dimmed, and the flag gate was covered by the dense fog in the surroundings. Only when all the swordsmen were killed would the flag gate be revealed again. Of course, if Xue Chong destroyed the Wind Destroyer formation, the blood-red lantern on the pole in front of the gate would have been extinguished. Not only would the gate be opened again, but the fog would have also disappeared. However, the 10-direction destroyer formation had just been restored, and its foundation was still damaged. Xiong Huasong couldn't fix these flaws yet. Fortunately, there weren't too many flaws in the 10 gates of the 10-direction destroyer formation. Just look at the Wind Destroyer formation. Reddish-yellow hurricanes wreaked havoc in the formation. The hurricanes were like sharp blades. Not only did they cut through the swordsman's sword lights, but they also completely dispersed the sword chi of the flying swords. Even the cold wind that passed through the swordsman's sword lights and blew into their bodies, causing them to stiffen. Even when they activated their sword origin, the situation didn't improve at all. Like Zhu Qingye and LV Ruochang, Xue Chong had already transformed into a sword. Beside him, several Grade 1 and Grade 2 illusory swordsmen had also transformed into swords. On top of the giant sword that Xue Chong transformed into, the sword radiance that was like a cold moon exuded a gloomy coldness. The swords that were formed by the swordsmen clustered around him also had sword radiances that were as hot as the sun. They also temporarily formed a simple sword formation within the formation. The sword radiances of different attributes interweaved with each other, trying their best to resist the bone-chilling yellow wind. There was no scenery around Xue Chong and the other cultivators. There was only chaos stirred up by countless wind tunnels. The chaos was like sticky mud, sealing off the entire formation. It was as if there was no more spiritual energy of heaven and earth other than the countless hurricanes. It was extremely soft. A sound came from a certain wind tunnel in the primal chaos, and a faint yellow light appeared at the bottom of the wind tunnel. Then, the yellow light spun violently, and a gentle wind appeared at the bottom of the wind tunnel. This breeze spun along the edges of the wind tunnel, becoming faster and stronger. By the time it blew out of the wind tunnel, it had already formed a huge reddish-yellow wind blade. It was like a huge wind vortex, blowing towards the tens of thousands of bright young sword sect disciples. At the same time, the wind tunnel was torn apart by the hurricane. Presumably, the next hurricane would definitely be stronger than this one. Not to mention the following hurricane, this roaring hurricane fell precisely where Xuechong and the others could not care less. The reddish-yellow wind blade destroyed the flying swords of more than 10 sword-nurturing swords and drawing swords. When the brilliance of the flying swords was destroyed, the flying swords' bodies rapidly rusted. Not long after, they were broken into several pieces and thrown into the air. What made the swordsmen tremble with fear the most was that the flying swords who had lost their flying swords did not even have time to spit out their life origin swords before the yellow wind blew straight through their bodies. After all the flying swords were scraped into pieces by the hurricane, pieces of flesh were also torn off their bodies at an extremely fast speed. In fact, before the two sword-nurturing swords could even scream, all their flesh was scraped off, leaving behind only white bones. Buzz! It was as if the entire world was shaking. In mid-air, the numerous wind tunnels flashed with a faint yellow brilliance at almost the same time. Hundreds, thousands of wind strands were gradually produced in the wind tunnels. At this moment, there was a temporary silence in the entire battle. But then, all the wind tunnels began to shake, and the chaos began to churn again. Thousands of hurricanes tore through the wind tunnels and flew out again. The entire wind-extinguishing formation was no longer able to see any brilliance. Even the brilliance of the giant swords was covered in the hurricane. My life is over. Xuechong saw that the hurricane had not yet arrived, but the connection between the giant swords that he had transformed into and the surrounding swords had been cut off by the power of the hurricane. He could not help but sigh like Zhu Qingye. The yellow wind in the wind-extinguishing formation was so magical that it caused Xuechong's heart to turn to ashes. He felt that what he was facing was the most powerful magic formation in the 10 Forces Annihilation formation. She did not even know who her opponent was from the Dao sect. At this moment, she also had the thought of retreating. Her sword intent swept past the sea of fire and swept towards the flag gate. The formation of earthly annihilation was something that Heng Heng had explained to Su Jia of the Rock Border sect that day. The formation of earthly annihilation is ever-changing and full of doubts. It is hidden within the mysteries of the formation, with thunder above and fire below and emotionless. Even with the 5 elements flying sword technique, it is difficult to escape the gloomy clouds of bones. This formation is based on the number of the Dao sect, so it is called earthly annihilation. This praise for the formation of earthly annihilation was a little exaggerated. Not to mention that it was impossible for the formation of earthly annihilation to have too many changes and form the Dao sect. It was also impossible for it to form the Dao sect. If one were to say that it was full of doubts, it could still be arranged a little more. However, since this formation of earthly annihilation was personally presided over by the Black Sky sect's Xiong Song, it naturally had a different atmosphere. The one who charged into the formation of earthly annihilation was Mu Ting of the Lunar Sword sect. She was a 3rd-grade illusory swordsman, and her cultivation could be counted on one hand among the many sword sections. However, even with this level of cultivation, even if Mu Ting had transformed into a sword, and even if several second-grade illusory swordsmen had transformed into swords at the same time, and nearly 10,000 disciples had formed a sword formation to resist, the situation was still precarious. The entire formation of earthly annihilation was filled with biting cold wind. The wisps of fog could not be blown away by the cold wind, and it blocked the gazes of all the sword cultivators. In the cold wind, the sword light around the sword cultivators flickered, and they were like candles in the wind. The situation was somewhat similar to the wind annihilation formation. However, this was not the most important killing move of the formation of earthly annihilation. The most powerful part of the formation of earthly annihilation was the ground beneath the sword cultivators. The dark, thick, solid earth that was as hard as gold and stone. Clearly, the ground was not the ordinary ground of the sword tomb. At this time, the ground had long been split into countless pieces, and the huge cracks were like bloody mouths that had opened up on the ground. The countless cracks were rapidly opening up and closing up, and the countless pieces of land were constantly shaking up and down, rubbing against each other left and right, and creating loud rumbling sounds. Waves of cold wind blew out from the rumbling sounds, and from the countless cracks. It was like the ghostly wind in the underworld. The ghostly wind was so biting cold, the earth shook, and the cracks were so ruthless. Although the huge sword transformed by Mu Ting and the others split the ground into pieces, the fragments opened their bloody mouths and kept swallowing the sword cultivators. The sword chi of the sword-nurturing sword and the sword-drawing sword could not destroy these fragments, but their sword light was squeezed and smashed by the tremors of the earth. Hundreds and thousands of swordsmen fell in this doomsday-like formation of earthly annihilation. Their corpses fell into the cracks of the earth, and with just a simple friction, they were immediately turned into meat paste. Blood was smeared in the cracks, and one could see the bloodiness and power of the formation of earthly annihilation. The Earth Extermination Formation sounded similar to the Earth Extermination Formation, but within the Earth Extermination Formation, there was a vast expanse of gray sand. The sand floated in the space of the Earth Extermination Formation, blocking the swordsman's vision. Even if the swordsman could release his divine sense, he would still be injured by the sand. The grains of sand were like the swordsman's sword light, densely packed and extremely sharp as they collided with the swordsman's defense. Except for the swordsman from the flowing sword sect, the huge sword transformed by the illusory sword grade 2 swordsman was barely holding on in the sand. Even the other illusory sword grade 1 swordsmen were in imminent danger in the sand. The various sword lights did not differentiate between attributes and sword intent in the sand, and they were all suppressed by the sand. They were constantly eroded by the sand, and the sword origin in their bodies poured out, trying to maintain this only barrier. As for those disciples with shallow cultivation, once their sword light was defeated by the sand, their flesh would immediately fester, and an indescribable itch would drill into their hearts. They could not help but claw at the sand, and the flesh on their hands would also fester. Pus and white bones gradually appeared, and the heart-wrenching screams seemed extremely small and helpless in this raging sand. Different from the formation of earthly annihilation, the formation of earthly annihilation was a piece of azure blue. It was unknown where the light came from, but when the light passed through the formation, countless small, scale-like crystals were reflected in the formation. The countless crystals flashed with azure blue brilliance, and the entire formation was like a world carved out of ice. However, this world of ice was extremely cold. Compared to the extreme north, it was even more austere. Chu Jianchong of the Xian sword sect had already transformed into a sword, and the scarlet flame on the sword light turned into a flame, as if it was going to burn the sky. However, the flame was only hot at the beginning, and it burned away the ice near it. Chapter 2639. He moved. Tsang Yuan, who had been motionless all this time, suddenly moved. It was as if the entire formation had come to life, and the energy was flowing out from where Zhang Yuan stood. Ha ha ha. I thought it was some kind of formation. So it's something similar to the millions of soul cultivators in Meng Mountains. Zhang Yuan moved a little, dispelling all the terror that had condensed within 1,000 feet. He laughed loudly and said, "Your Dao sect is really funny. Instead of using a good array formation, you set up some bullshit soul cultivation array formation. Do you know what a soul cultivator is? Do you know how to use a soul tool? Do you know what a real soul formation looks like?" When Yuan Zhongyu heard this, he raised his eyebrows and his eyes involuntarily turned to Liang Mingfu. The two of them had only been in charge of the formation for a short period of time, so they were not familiar with it. It was not as convenient as the other gold core cultivators in the meeting hall. Even the tens of thousands of disciples hidden in the formation were scratching their heads at the incantations used to activate the formation. Although they were in position and the soul obliteration formation was set up, Yuan Zhongyu's flagpole was abnormally difficult to wave, and he would occasionally feel the backlash of his magic power. Clearly, there was a problem with the tens of thousands of disciples transmitting their magic power, and there was also a problem with Yuan Zhongyu's incantation. Liang Mingfu saw the look in Yuan Zhongyu's eyes and shook his head helplessly. He was only a cultivator of the Nanming sect, and the sect's name had the word Ming in it. However, he had nothing to do with soul cultivators, so he didn't know anything about spells related to the soul. Zhang Yuan's words hit the nail on the head and hit the nail on the head. Perhaps we can only buy some time. When Yuan Zhongyu saw Liang Mingfu shaking his head, he groaned inwardly. He knew that the 10 Forces Annihilation formation was an ancient formation that was linked to each other. As long as one of the 10 formations was destroyed, even if the other 9 formations were not destroyed, the swordsman would still be able to escape from the formation. However, if all 10 formations were not destroyed, then they were a whole. The difficulty of destroying one of the formations was far greater than destroying one of the individual formations. What's wrong? Are you scared? Yuan Zhongyu sneered, waved the banner slightly and said, "The magic of Dao sect originated from the ancient times. How could it be compared to those uncivilized barbarians in Meng Mountains? If you don't want to become a vengeful spirit under this old man's banner, why don't you descend from the cloud and let this old man tie you up? This old man can guarantee with my life that I will not let you fall here, and even what? Can you still make me a disciple of your Kunlun sect?" Zhang Yuan curled his lips and asked coldly. "Oh. If you want to, it's not impossible. Now that I have the Kunlun sect master's token, I can accept you into my Kunlun sect as my senior martial brother." Yuan Zhongyu's eyes flashed with a hint of joy as he hurriedly explained. "Pui," Zhang Yuan spat out his phlegm the moment he opened his mouth. When he saw the phlegm fly out in an arc, Zhang Yuan laughed out loud. "A small Dao sect that hides evil actually wants to accept me as a disciple. This is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life." "You don't know," Yuan Zhongyu hurriedly said. "My Kunlun sect is the most ancient cultivation sect on the Xiaoyu continent. Our specific orthodoxy can only be traced back to the primordial era. The primordial era is bullshit." Zhang Yuan opened his mouth wide and shouted. It then looked at Yuan Zhongyu who was in the distance, and there was a trace of unwillingness in its eyes. Immediately, this unwillingness turned into the intention to retreat. Zhang Yuan finally could not withstand the power of the door of life and death and hurriedly rushed out of the door. Of course, at this moment, more than 10 beast cultivators rushed into the door of life and death. Their bodies were surrounded by the gray brilliance and they fell in midair. Seeing Tsang Yuan rushing out of the door, all the bird and beast cultivators understood that they no longer dared to challenge the door of life and death that even a third-grade illusory sword cultivator could not withstand. They turned around and fled into the distance. "Where are you going?" Yuan Zhongyu and Liang Mingfu heaved a long sigh of relief. They shouted loudly and waved the banner in their hands with all their might. This time, it was different from before. The gray door, which was already 1,000 feet high, chased after more than 10,000 beast cultivators and bird cultivators like a stream of light. All the beast cultivators and bird cultivators who were passed through by the door of life and death did not resist at all. They fell from midair, and there was no sign of life. This was really too strange. Even though the soul cultivators and bird cultivators had extremely condensed souls, and even though many of the swordsmen had fought with soul cultivators before, it was indeed the first time they had encountered such a formation that looked similar to soul cultivators on the surface but was actually very different. How could they resist it? Seeing the bird cultivators and beast cultivators falling like dumplings into a pot, all the swordsmen were terrified. One by one, they scattered like birds frightened by the twang of a bow, fleeing in mid-air without any order. They only wanted to avoid the gray brilliance. Chapter 2641. However, something unexpected happened. A thin and small bird cultivator was flashed by the gray light. His face turned ashen, and he immediately fell from the sky. But it didn't take long for the bird cultivator to open his eyes again. Blinking several times, the bird cultivator steadied himself in the air. Looking left and right, the bird cultivator couldn't believe he was still alive. "Brothers," the bird cultivator cried out, "this array is similar to a soul cultivator's soul array. As long as our soul armaments work, this light won't work on us." The bird cultivator's voice was loud enough for the beast cultivators around him to hear. Many of them were happy to see that they had soul armaments as well. "Roar, hurry!" Tsang Yuan called out from behind the bird cultivator. "Hurry!" The bird cultivator was stunned again. He didn't understand what Tsang Yuan meant. At this moment, the gray brilliance had already passed by the bird cultivator and flew forward. The gray brilliance surrounding the bird cultivator became even brighter. There seemed to be a soft, almost inaudible sound. The fluctuation in the bird cultivator's head immediately disappeared, and the bird cultivator fell from the sky without saying another word. This time, although all the bird cultivator's eyes were fixed on him, he did not manage to stabilize himself in midair, nor did he open his eyes again. Everyone understood now that the door of life and death was much more powerful the closer one was to the inside. Even if one could pass through the door of life and death, they wouldn't be able to fly inside. This was the experience the bird cultivator had gained by risking his life. "Let's run." The beast cultivators felt a little more confident in their hearts, but they still couldn't relax. They were chased by the gate of life and death for another few hundred feet, and another few hundred beast cultivators were silently killed. Not a single beast cultivator was able to escape like the bird cultivator from before. It looks like different soul armaments have different uses. The beast cultivator was once again gaining experience. Whoa! A sorrowful sound suddenly came from the gate of life and death. The gray light suddenly stopped and didn't move forward an inch. Only the gray light continued to flicker and emit strange fluctuations in an orderly manner. Roar! Tsang Yuan, who had been trapped by the door of life and death, let out a loud roar. He passed through the door of life and death and came out from the transparent space. A sense of relief washed over Tsang Yuan's heart. This array. It's far too powerful. Tsang Yuan stood in midair, maintaining a certain distance from the door of life and death. The redness in his eyes lessened slightly as his heart was in turmoil. This gray light is not easily destroyed and this door is several hundred feet wide. It seems that the Dao sect intends to push this door forward and force us, the warriors of the Huan Kingdom, into the door so that they can take our lives. But the array has only been pushed by 10%, and thousands of Sword Realm disciples have already died. If things go according to their plan, then wouldn't Sword Realm be meat on the chopping block? We'll be slaughtered by the Dao school. Zhang Yuan looked at the array and thought to himself anxiously, but how do we break this door? Oh, that's right. Why isn't the door moving? Zhang Yuan suddenly realized something. He didn't believe that Yuan Zhongyu from the Kunlun school was trying to persuade him to join the Kunlun school again. Zhang Yuan looked at Yuan Zhongyu, who was flustered behind the door of life and death, and saw the ripples of mana coming from behind the door of life and death. These Dao school cultivators aren't familiar with this array. Fortunately, when Yuan Zhongyu's soul flew out of his body, the mana he channeled into the flag was interrupted. It was also at this moment that the backlash stopped. The door of life and death naturally stopped there. This kind of unexpected situation was already explained by Xian Tian's Sex Xiong Hua Song in the Jade Slip. Yuan Zhongyu was also familiar with it. But when it came to this, he couldn't help but be flustered. He was really afraid that Zhang Yuan would turn around. If the door of life and death was destroyed, not only would many Kunlun sect disciples die, but the entire array would also be in danger. Fortunately, as Yuan Zhongyu cast a spell, the door of life and death once again overflowed with a gray brilliance. The door of life and death began to move again. Of course, Zhang Yuan's decision was also beyond Yuan Zhongyu's expectation. He originally thought that Zhang Yuan would take advantage of the moment when the door of life and death had just moved, and the mana he channeled into the door of life and death was not stable yet. In this way, Yuan Zhongyu might suffer from the backlash of his mana again. Who knew that when Zhang Yuan saw the door of life and death moving, he immediately turned around. It seemed that he was not sloppy at all. His huge body was even more agile than a fist-sized mouse. Yuan Zhongyu glanced at Liang Mingfu. Both of their eyes flashed with a trace of luck. At the same time, their hearts were calm. They knew that the door of life and death in the array could only move slowly and not hurriedly. Hence, the two of them activated the flag and directed the mana of tens of thousands of hidden disciples to slowly push the door of life and death towards the fleeing beast cultivators and bird cultivators. Although the movement of the door of life and death was slow, the door was getting bigger and bigger. After pushing for thousands of feet, the door had basically covered the entire array from top to bottom. There was no room for the enemy to move. Yuan Zhongyu and Liang Mingfu's hearts were once again calm. They knew that as long as they pushed the door of life and death in front of the beast cultivators and bird cultivators, they would be forced to have no place to escape. They could only pass through the door of life and death and die. At this moment, Yuan Zhongyu could not help but feel a trace of disdain towards Zhang Yuan. If Zhang Yuan had turned around just now, it might have been an opportunity. However, that opportunity was fleeting. Beast cultivators like Zhang Yuan might not have the guts to do so. However, just as Yuan Zhongyu was secretly sneering, another accident occurred in the array. The giant ape that Zhang Yuan had transformed into did not return to his original form. Instead, he turned around and dashed towards the other side of the array. He wanted to avoid the unpredictable door of life and death. At this moment, the interior of the array was gray and it was impossible to tell which direction was which. The group of beast cultivators and bird cultivators were simply fleeing in the opposite direction of the door of life and death. However, after running for thousands of feet or even thousands of feet, the gray array suddenly flashed with a black and white brilliance. That brilliance was the brilliance that Zhang Yuan and the other beast cultivators had seen when they entered the soul-extinguishing array's flag gate. Although the brilliance looked extremely dim, it was extremely clear against the gray background. The giant ape was running with all his might, causing the entire array to tremble. How could Song Yuan not know that the flag gate was located when he suddenly saw such a brilliance in this directionless place? In an instant, the giant ape suddenly changed directions and dashed to the side. At the same time, he even glanced at the door of life and death, which was not too far away from him. That's right. He already understood that there was no way to stop the sword cultivator from escaping. Chapter 2642. Sure enough, when the two of them discovered the flaw in the Great Formation, they sighed in their hearts. They wanted to, but they lacked the strength to, and could only slowly push the gate of life and death. The giant ape's huge fist had already smashed the flag gate, creating a square black and white outline. The brilliant black and white brilliance was like a bright sword that pierced into the gray formation. When the giant ape stretched out its hands, its tree-like fingers grabbed the spot where the black and white brilliance was. Open, the giant ape let out a deafening roar, but the entire formation shook again. With a rumbling sound, like a huge rock rolling down a slope, the flag gate was actually lifted out from the formation by the giant ape. The black and white brilliance trembled at first, then suddenly rushed into the formation, blasting a huge passage out of the gray formation. Whoosh, a clear sound was heard, and a hurricane rushed into the passage. The black and white brilliance in the giant ape's hands disappeared, and the entrance of the flag gate that the sword cultivators had entered from before was revealed in front of the passage. Go, the giant ape raised its arms and pounded its chest a few times. With a roar, all the bird and beast cultivators rushed into the passage like flowing water, quickly disappearing. The giant ape turned around coldly, and its red eyes flashed with mockery. Its gaze was aimed at Yuan Zhongyu. Yuan Zhongyu stared at the giant ape's eyes without flinching, but he said to Liang Mingfu, "Let's rest for a while." "Yes, we'll listen to fellow Yuan's instructions." Liang Mingfu replied and stopped circulating his magic power. Yuan Zhongyu watched as the giant ape turned around and left. He narrowed his eyes and muttered, "What we're thinking." Fellow Daoist Xiong might also be thinking the same thing. How could he not know the flaw in the formation's entrance? This formation is surrounded on all sides, even we don't know where the entrance is, and sword cultivators may not be able to find it easily. I hope so. Liang Mingfu nodded slightly. Just as he said a few words, the entire soul-extinguishing formation shook violently. This vibration originated from the flag gate that the giant ape had destroyed, and it spread in all directions. Oh, no. Yuan Zhongyu suddenly came to a realization and shouted, "Quick, the flaw of this flag gate has already affected the entire array. I'll wait." After that, Yuan Zhongyu didn't know what to say. After all, he only knew how to activate the gate of life and death. He didn't even know how to set up the soul-extinguishing array. How would he know how to withstand the vibrations of this array? Just as Yuan Zhongyu had expected, the earthly annihilation formation was the first to be affected. This was something that Xiong Huasong had personally presided over. At this moment, within the array, the earth was shaking. The cracks were like the mouths of blood beasts, wantonly devouring the swordsman. Even the giant sword that Mu Ting had transformed into was barely holding on. It would not be long before the earth's annihilation array swallowed up all the swordsmen. But at this moment, a bright light suddenly flashed from the top of the dark green earth, and a door appeared in the light. Wasn't it the entrance that Mu Ting and the others had flown in? Oh, no. Xiong Huasong was the first cultivator to realize that something was wrong. He glanced around and immediately knew what the problem was. Previously, he had set up a trap in mid-air outside the 10 magic arrays, tricking the swordsmen into attacking. He wanted them to know that the entrance of the magic arrays was the most solid place. He wanted them to enter the 10 major annihilation formations and fear the entrance of the flag gate, so that they wouldn't think of attacking from there. When he was about to reach the flag gate overflowing with snow-white brilliance, his physical body gradually appeared. Just when Xuechong was a little anxious and wanted to take advantage of the fact that the secret technique was still effective and his physical body had not been completely revealed to enter the flag gate, a reddish-yellow chilly wind blew out from a whirlwind the size of a human head above the flag gate. That chilly wind was like a sword. It rotated slightly in mid-air and swooped down toward Xuechong. The spiral-shaped wind blade seemed to be able to cut the air. Seeing this, Xuechong's expression didn't change much. He already knew that the person in charge of the wind-extinguishing array must have some secret technique that he didn't know, which could prevent him from escaping. Therefore, from the tip of his sword that had yet to reveal his head, a reddish-red sword radiance rushed out. Then, a powerful sword aura was born from the sword radiance, and a reddish-red sword essence, like the rising sun, rapidly rotated to meet the wind blade that was coming at him. Unexpectedly, when the sword essence that Xuechong had been brewing came into contact with the wind blade, it immediately froze, as though it was frozen. In the blink of an eye, there was a crisp, "Kacha" sound. This sound was nothing in the whistling chilly wind, but when it stopped in Xuechong's ears, it was as though the entire array was about to be split apart. The sword essence that was like the rising sun actually turned into fragments of light, and the shimmering sword radiance was still swaying from the fragments. Seeing that the wind blade didn't slow down even after the sword essence was broken, Xuechong was finally shocked. However, the wind blade was still faster than his flying speed. At this moment, although Xuechong's head was close to the edge of the flag gate, the wind blade had already rushed to Xuechong's waist. Go! Xuechong opened his mouth slightly, and a small reddish-red sword flew out from his exposed head. Chapter 2644. We can't separate, and we can't merge. Then what should we do? Zhang Yuan was a little impatient. Are we going to be trapped here until we die? We should be looking for a flaw in the array, right? Ruo Ling said calmly. Just like how sword friend Zhang Yuan rushed out of the array. As she spoke, everyone looked up at the spot above their heads. That was the flaw in LV Ruochang's spell. This was exactly what Yuan Zhongyu and Liang Mingfu had thought. If a sword cultivator wanted to find a flaw, they would first look for the entrance and the core of the array. Unfortunately, when LV Ruochang and the rest entered the array, they had already attacked the core of the array, which seemed to be a flaw. However, they didn't know whether it was the entrance or the core of the array, but Xiong Huasong had already set up a trap. LV Ruochang and the rest returned empty-handed. At this moment, the group of swordsmen looked at the glossy clouds in the sky and sighed in their hearts. They knew that it wasn't a flaw. A flaw is not easy to find. LV Ruochang also sighed slightly. There's a saying in the array, what's real is fake, and what's fake is real. What's real and what's fake, other than the person who set up the array, who can tell? Not good. LV Jianyu, look. The red brilliance on the 10 flag gates, is it moving towards us? Chu Jianchong of Xian Sword Sect was a grade 2 illusory swordsman. He was lucky enough to bring a group of Xian Sword Sect disciples out of the ice extermination array. Although he had lost 4,000 disciples, he was still able to bring a large number of them with him. However, he was seriously injured. He had just taken an elixir and closed his eyes to regulate his breathing. Chu Jianchong didn't think much about the flaw in the array. However, when he opened his eyes and looked at the ice destruction array that he had just escaped from, the red light in the thick fog attracted his attention. As expected. When Ruoling and the rest heard this, they all turned pale with fright. Even Zhu Qingye cried out, "I understand now. Actually, the so-called flaw in the flag gates isn't really a flaw. After these arrays are activated, they slowly close together. In the end, these 10 flag gates will definitely merge into one. We will definitely be forced into these 10 arrays. This flaw is no longer a flaw. That's why the cultivators of the Tao sect didn't care." Zhu Qingye's words enlightened everyone, and all the cultivators were suddenly enlightened. Their thoughts were the same as Xiong Huasong's. Since all the flag gates would disappear at the end of the array, then the so-called flaw of the flag gates would also not exist. Why should Xiong Huasong spend so much effort to make up for this flaw? Even the nascent soul cultivator of the Xian Tian sect thought the same, didn't he? But LV Ruochang's thoughts were far more than that. She said word by word, when the 10 great arrays are combined and the flag gate disappears, the entire great array will combine into one. The earth, fire, wind, and thunder in the great array will be activated. With the help of the mana of hundreds of thousands of Daoist cultivators, this great array will be hell on earth. Not to mention the third great illusory swordsmen like us, even the masters who have transformed into swords, will not be able to escape this calamity. Ruoling sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "When did the Tao sect become so powerful?" "The Tao sect has always been this powerful." LV Ruochang smiled bitterly and said, "It's just that they have always treasured what they have and schemed against each other, using their brains for internal friction. If they are really forced to a dead end and work together, then the outcome of the battle will be reversed." LV Jianyu, time is of the essence. "Where should we go?" Zhang Yuan asked anxiously. Chapter 2645. It would be best if wood was used as the base of the array. Mu Ting frowned and said, "Although the flying swords of my sword cultivators have the 5-element sword intent, they are of the metal element and can suppress wood-type arrays. How can it be so easy?" Zhu Qingye sneered. "If we know, how can the Tao sect cultivators not know? Perhaps there is no wood-type array in this great battle." "That's right. I think it is most likely a thunder-type array." Zhang Yuan grinned. However, Lu Ruochang shook his head. "No lightning is born in the sword realm. A thunder-type array cannot borrow the spirit qi of heaven and earth from the outside world. No matter how stupid the Tao sect cultivators are, they can't set up such an array." What's impossible?" Zhang Yuan laughed again. "Perhaps there is a thunder-type array in this array. If the Tao sect did not set up this thunder-type array, their 10 major arrays would not be complete. How can they stop us?" Hiss. Lu Ruochang took a deep breath and seemed to understand something. "Fellow Daoist Zhang Yuan, are you saying that this array had to leave a fatal flaw?" "That's right. If it was anywhere else, this thunder-type array would be a great killing weapon comparable to the soul destruction array. However, in the sword tomb, this array is naturally a great weakness." Zhang Yuan nodded. "Fellow Daoist LV." Chu Jianchong, who was beside him, hesitated slightly and said in a low voice, "I don't know why the sword tomb is devoid of lightning, but what if the array can generate lightning on its own?" The Tao sect's thunder-controlling sect disciples know the thunder-attracting technique and most of their physiques are of the thunder type. That terrifying phoenix might be in there too. "That's right." Lu Ruochang suddenly realized something and said hurriedly, we can't see any traces of the terrifying phoenix in the array. He must be in this array or in the battle where sword friend Shuachong died. The array relies on the dermic powers of tens of thousands of cultivators. How can a Foundation establishment cultivator do anything? Chu Jianchong said disapprovingly. A cultivator who can kill Qin Jian. Can he be a Foundation establishment cultivator? Zhu Qingye sneered. Even if he is a cultivator of the late Jindan stage, he can't. Chu Jianchong retorted sarcastically, as if he didn't take Zhu Qingye's cultivation of the third grade of illusory sword seriously. Ruoling frowned. She had already noticed the subtle change in Chu Jianchong's attitude. It was as if he had decided to go all out. She immediately smiled and said, "There is a lot of heaven and earth spiritual qi in the sword tomb. It is the best place for heavenly lightning to form. However, due to the remnant sword intent and the wails of the broken swords, the heavenly lightning is stopped." The Dao Sex array also tore apart the space of the sword tomb, so the heavenly lightning can't descend. That's why the sword tomb is devoid of lightning. Many thanks for sword friend Ruoling's explanation. Chu Jianchong faintly smiled, and cupped his hands. He didn't have any intention of debating with Zhu Qingye. Mu Ting bit her lips and said in a low voice, "In that case, we are going to charge into the last formation." However, several Grade 3 illusory swordsmen and dozens of Grade 2 illusory swordsmen looked at each other and didn't dare to answer casually. Finally, they all looked at LV Ruochang. LV Ruochang naturally knew that she had to answer this question, but she really didn't dare to. She raised her head and looked at the canopy in the sky. At this moment, the canopy was changing again. 10 streaks of light flowed on it in an extremely orderly manner. The pattern of the flow was somewhat obvious, but upon closer inspection, it was somewhat inexplicable. Zhu Qingye's words obviously represented the thoughts of some swordsmen. Chu Jianchong, Tian Simu, and the others turned to look at LV Ruochang. However, LV Ruochang didn't pay attention to them at all. Instead, she raised her head and looked at the flowing colors in the sky. She was so focused that she looked like a girl in love who was looking at the sunset. The brilliance of the 10 colors was like the sunset glow. It illuminated LV Ruochang's eyes, but it could not ignite the spark in her heart. Similarly, the flowing colors illuminated the faces of many swordsmen, but it could not drive away the increasing anxiety in their eyes. After 2 hours, the flowing colors became even more oppressive, and the brilliance became even more dazzling. 10 red lights, like the eyes of hungry wolves, revealed a ferocious look in the thick fog, and were getting closer and closer. Just as the crowd was getting impatient, the thousands of disciples who had gone out returned. The array was not big to begin with, but they were really very careful. Other than the moving flag gate and the rolling fog, they had checked every inch of the array. However, looking at their dejected appearances, it was needless to say that they didn't find anything. "What did you find?" Ruoling asked with a smile when she saw that LV Ruochang ignored the disciples and only looked up. "Senior Sister Ruoling, please no." A disciple from Failing Sword Manor hurriedly replied, "We didn't find anything. There were no flaws." Then, he hesitated for a moment before saying, "There's also an extremely powerful restriction under the ground of this formation. A disciple who can burrow into the ground controlled a flying sword to enter, but after a rumbling sound came from the ground, he never came out. In addition, we also tried to fly higher, but after reaching a certain height, we found it difficult to fly any further. It seems to be a restriction of the Dao sect. Also..." The disciple licked his somewhat dry lips, as if he had many things to say, but did not know how to say them. "Sigh, in short, we used many methods, but this formation is like a large jar, airtight. Yes, you can go back and wait." The smile on Ruo Ling's face did not change. This result could be summed up in one sentence, and this disciple was right. After the disciples returned to their groups, Ruo Ling looked at LV Ruochang and said in a warm voice, "Junior sister LV, if we can find any clues, I'm afraid that it will be in an instant. However, if we can't find any clues, we probably won't be able to do it in the remaining 2 hours." Zhu Jinyo's words are reasonable. At this moment, the Dao sect cultivators are also familiarizing themselves with the formation. If we seize the opportunity to attack, we will be able to catch them off guard. Even if there's a mistake in the last formation, we can still charge out. However, if we wait for them to fully understand the formation and the entire formation closes, we won't even have a way out. Yes, LV Jianyu. Mu Ting was also somewhat impatient and reminded her in a low voice. All right. At this moment, LV Ruochang reluctantly shifted her gaze away from the sky curtain. Her face was as calm as water. Looking at the red lanterns of the water destruction formation and the already opened flag gate, she waved her hand and said, "Swordsman, listen to my command." Yes. The swordsmen were in high spirits and shouted, "We will listen to LV Jinyo's command." Black Phoenix Sword Sect in front, Failing Sword Village behind. LV Ruochang casually ordered, as natural as moving clouds in flowing water. In a moment, all the disciples of the sword sect were properly arranged. Finally, she took another look at the colorful sky curtain and took a deep breath. Raising her hand, she took the lead and rode on her sword, shouting, "Victory or defeat will be decided in this battle." Warriors of the sword domain, follow me into the formation and kill the Dao sect's god cultivators. After saying that, a resounding sword cry was emitted from the flying sword under her feet, like the cry of a phoenix. The flying swords of dozens of swordsmen also cried out, and there was no lack of desperation in them. Then, the flying swords of hundreds of thousands of swordsmen also cried out, and a feeling of wind blowing and cold water spread throughout the entire formation. Hundreds of thousands of flying swords cried out, causing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to flow within the great battle, rolling up a hurricane. The hurricane blew up the sword formation of tens of thousands of swordsmen, making a whistling sound. At this time, LV Ruochang had already flown to the front of the flag gate of the water destruction array. Looking at the snow-white brilliance of the flag gate, she took a deep breath. Her messy hair blocked her vision. Although it did not affect anything, she still elegantly stretched out her hand like all women who loved beauty. But just as she did so, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. Gold attribute spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Gold attribute spiritual chi of heaven and earth. LV Ruochang's heart suddenly became clear. The gold attribute spiritual chi of heaven and earth in this great formation is more abundant than the other 5 elements spiritual chi of heaven and earth. The gold attribute spiritual chi of heaven and earth in this sword tomb is even more abundant. Among the formations set up by the Dao sect's cultivators, the gold attribute formation is certainly more powerful than the ordinary ones. But, the spirit chi backlash of the formation itself is also stronger than the other formations. GMO and the others who are in charge of the gold destruction formation also have to use double the amount of magic power to control the formation. Otherwise, we'll have to summon all our sword energy and give the cultivators a surprise. LV Jianyu. Chu Jianchong hesitated. Everything you say is reasonable, but, since the strongest part of the formation is also the weakest part of the formation, then what we'll face will definitely be the strongest attack of the 10 formations. Do you think we can withstand the strongest attack of this formation? Chu Jianchong obviously didn't believe in the idea of breaking through the golden destruction formation. No matter how strong the Golden Destruction Formation is, can it be more unpredictable than the Soul Destruction Formation? Tsang Yuan sneered. I'm not even afraid of the Soul Destruction Formation, so why should I be afraid of this Golden Destruction Formation? Although Tsang Yuan's words didn't convey his meaning and didn't answer Chu Jiancheng's question, his support for LV Ruochang was obvious. LV Ruochang nodded slightly and looked straight at Chu Jiancheng. She said word by word, even if you can't withstand it, you have to. Even if you can't withstand it, you have to. If we can't break the Golden Destruction Formation, we'll all die. I believe that I can die in the end. If Sword Friend Chu doesn't fight, I'm afraid you'll be the first to die among the 10 illusory swordsmen. Chu Jiancheng's expression changed. LV Ruochang had really spoken his mind. He was only at the second grade of the illusory sword realm, which was similar to the cultivation of LV Ruochang's disciples. He was really worried that he couldn't withstand the attack of the Golden Destruction Formation. Forget it. We'll die either way. Chu Jiancheng raised his head and said, there are no cowards among the warriors of the Sword Realm. Although Chu doesn't think that the Golden Destruction Formation is the best place to break through, Chu still believes in LV Jianyu. Good. Who would have thought that just over 2 hours later, the hundreds of thousands of swordsmen would actually turn around and charge into the Golden Destruction Formation, which really caught GMO and the others off guard. While they were reporting to Xiong Huasong and the others, they hurriedly arranged the formation so that the disciples who had already relaxed could regain their spirit and face the final counterattack of all the swordsmen. This was all the swordsmen, far more than the tens of thousands of Black Phoenix Sword sect disciples. At the same time, GMO and the others were somewhat confused. They didn't know how LV Ruochang, who had suffered greatly in this formation, could return to the Golden Annihilation Formation again. Was she not afraid of dying under the bone-corroding golden light? When GMO of Sky Patrol City saw LV Ruochang and the others fly to the front of the swordsman, he sneered as usual. He waved the small banner in his hand slightly, and golden light overflowed from it. He asked, LV Ruochang, you still haven't given up. Why? Do you really want to choose this Golden Destruction Formation as your burial place? Then, he looked at the dozens of illusory swordsmen and said, it's fine that you came here alone, but you actually gave us such a great battle merit. This great gift. We really have to thank you. Don't you think so, fellow cultivators? GMO even turned to Ji Hong and the others and asked them in a very confident manner. That's right, LV Ruochang really knows our intentions. Ha ha ha. Ji Hong and the others laughed. At this moment, wang, wang. Countless sword cries resounded in front of Ji Hong and the others. The dozens of illusory swordsmen did not say anything. Various colored sword lights appeared around them, and their sword energy soared into the sky. All the swordsmen who could use secret techniques to transform into swords did so. Even Tsang Yuan of the Quilted Mountain sect roared, and his body rapidly expanded. The dozens of huge swords seemed to have taken off their huge scabbards, and they revealed a ferocious appearance in the Golden Destruction Formation.